Masechet Eruvin Daf Samichet. We are dealing with the story in the Mishnah from a few dapim ago, where the Rabban Gamliel tells a story about how there was a Sadducee who lived together in the courtyard with him in Jerusalem. Sadducee is a Jew, but he rejects rabbinic law and therefore rejects the concept of Eruv. However, according to Rabbi Meir's interpretation of Rabban Gamliel, the Sadducee can join with the others, and he can renounce his property and thereby allow the others in there to carry. And the story there says that Rabban Gamliel's father says, "Hurry up and use the courtyard, take things out to the courtyard, so that you grab hold of it before the Sadducee does. If the Sadducee goes first, then you'll have a problem." And that seems to indicate that as long as you go and the rabbinic Jews go and use it first, then the Sadducee will not be able to take back his right to the courtyard. That's fine, except that we saw another baraita which sounded like he can renounce any time, even after the rabbinic Jews go there, and so. We noted the possible contradiction between the Mishnah and that baraita, and we already answered that yesterday by saying that here, as long as the rabbinic Jews that are there go and use it first, they hold on to it, and then the Sadducee cannot undo it. And however, if they did not, in other words, if the Sadducee comes and says, "I renounce my property," but then everybody was still sleeping, and the Sadducee says, "You know what, I'm going to go and carry out of it and take it back," then the others in the courtyard lose their right. So we gave that answer, and in fact, now we're going to back it up today with another baraita. This is a long baraita that actually is very nice because it summarizes all the cases. So let's read the baraita together. V'hatanya ad shelo natan reshuto. If hotzi ben b'shogeg ben b'mezid yachol levatel. If the person who's living in one of the residents, if he carries something out of his house, he's not allowed to because there is no eruv here. But let's say he does. He violates and he carries something out. Whether it's on purpose or by mistake, he can do bitul after that. Just because he started using it doesn't matter. He can then do bitul, according to the Rabbi Meir. If he did it by mistake, he forgot it was Shabbat, whatever, and he goes and uses it, then he can still, after that, renounce his right to the property because he didn't mean it. But if he did mean it, if it's on purpose, I'm going to go out, that shows that he wants to use his own courtyard, and he can't go and renounce it afterwards. Okay, that case is not relevant to what we were talking about before, but the following is Misha Natan Reshuta. Now he already renounced it. He went out, made an announcement, "I renounced my right to the property, everybody else can use it." But then Vehotzi, and then he goes and uses it anyway, which is not allowed. Ben b'shogeg ben mezid oser divrei Rabbi Meir. Then even if it was by mistake, that undoes his renunciation, and everyone else in the courtyard cannot use it. Only if he does it on purpose. That shows that he's taking it back. But if he did it by mistake, then he's in violation. But he's not. Doesn't mean he's taking it back. Fine. When is this true? When is this true? When would it be Meir say that his going out undoes the renunciation? Only if the other people in the courtyard did not yet use it. But if they already used it, they took hold of it and keep it, and therefore, even if the resident who renounces property then goes and carries out there, doesn't change the status, and they can use it. So that backs up the resolution that we said earlier. Okay, so we mentioned there a possible contradiction between two statements of Rabbi Meir. Now we're going to resolve two contradiction between two statements of Rabbi Yehuda, as follows. Amar Mor. In this baraita, Rabbi Yehuda said, Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'lashon acheret, not this Baraita, above Baraita. Rabbi Yehuda had a different version of the story. He says, "Maharu v'asu sorchechem b'mavoy al shelo techshach v'yesor alechem." So when there was a Sadducee living in the courtyard, Rabban Gamliel's father, or rather, Rabban Gamliel himself said, "Go and use the courtyard before Shabbat starts, because once Shabbat starts, then you will not be able to use it because there is a Sadducee there." Therefore, that means Alma Goyhu. Sadducee is considered, for the purposes of Eruv, like a Goy because he doesn't believe in the whole concept of Eruv. He cannot even renounce his property. We have to rent it from him, as we would if there was a non-Jew living in the courtyard. So therefore, you have to use the courtyard before it gets dark. Once it gets dark, there's no possibility of his renouncing. So that's what it would seem from that Baraita. But we and that was in the Baraita. But we in our version, in our Mishnah, we have here the Biuda says a different says this following language: go and use the mavoy before he does, and then he will make it asur for you. This sounds like people are allowed to use the mavoy, which the Sadducee, when the Sadducee renounced the property, even on Shabbat, and that would sound like the Sadducee is considered like a Jew. So how are we going to resolve this? When the Mishnah said until he takes out, it's not until the Sadducee takes out, but rather until the day goes out. And so therefore it's the same as what the Baraita said, before it gets dark. That's one answer. Or we can resolve it a different way. They're talking about two different kinds of Sadducees, or two different kinds of people who violate the law. If it's talking about someone who violates Shabbat but does it in private, then that's what the Mishnah was saying, that person can renounce his property. That person's considered like a Jew. And the Baraita that says you better use it before Shabbat starts, because after Shabbat starts, he cannot join at all. He cannot even renounce his properties like a non-Jew. That's talking about someone who violates Shabbat in public. He's not just desecrating for his own sake, but he just shows that he has no care at all, and would even do it in public. That person excludes himself from the community, and therefore cannot join together and cannot even renounce his rights. Okay, this is very interesting, a way of separating, answering the question, and it brings up a very important topic of what is considered a mumad, who is considered an apostate. What does it mean to, what does someone have to do in order to be excluded from the Jewish community, that this affects various laws. So that's what we're going to get into now. And this has obviously a lot of relevance for today. So, keman azla hadetanya mumar b'gilui panim hareze eno mevatel deshut gilui panim mumar have. So now we're going to ask. We have a Baraita, so we're going to wonder whose opinion is this. So mumar is an apostate and someone who is brazen-faced, someone who just shows himself to be disrespectful to Torah. These people are considered like non-Jews, and they cannot renounce property in an eruv. So before we answer that, we wonder something about these two categories, mumad and gilui panim. Are those two separate things? Isn't it the same thing? Someone who's an apostate shows that he's brazen-faced against the Torah. Ela mumad b'gilui panim. So rather we put these two as not as two categories, but as one category, an apostate who is brazen-faced, and so who does this follow? Keman Rabbi Yehuda. This would follow Rabbi Yehuda, which is fits our answer, what we just said, that Rabbi Yehuda says that such a person, such a Sadducee, would not be able, does it befaresia, would not be able to do that. A quick point here: what does it mean, the Sadducee that does something in private or in public? I mean, the Sadducee, by definition, he has a whole different set of interpretations. So, how could we consider him, okay if he's Mechilel Shabbat Bitsin'ah, what kind of Sadducee would do that? So, well, it could be in two possibilities. One is there were some Sadducees who, even though they believed in the Sadducean law, but because the Pharisees were strong, were the majority, and so they didn't want to offend the sensibilities of the Pharisees. And we know this from story in the Bet HaMikdash, where there was one Kohen Gadol who was a Sadducee, but because the others in charge in the committee in the Bet HaMikdash were Pharisees, he made sure not to violate their law. So although we know he believed and would have wanted to do differently, in practice or in public he did not. And so that shows at least some amount of respect for the Pharisaic law, and that person would be okay. Or it could be a case where someone grows up as a Sadducee and never learned the law any differently. So therefore, his violation of the rabbinic law is not on purpose as a protest to show that he knows better, but rather this is all he learned from childhood. And so that's like a tinok shenishpat, like a child who grew up among captives. So those could be two possible cases where someone can be a Sadducee, but yet not considered Mechalel Shabbat befar Hesya. Okay, so now we are going to talk about this, a similar case. There was a certain person, he was going out with either a ring or a necklace, a perfume necklace on Shabbat, something that you're not allowed to carry. And when he saw Rabbi Yehuda Nasiah, this is the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he quickly covered it. In other words, he was embarrassed to be violating Shabbat and carrying before the great sage. Amar, Kegon Zeh mevatel reshut Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi saw him do that. He did notice it, but he said, this kind of person can renounce his rights. In other words, this person is considered a Jew for the laws of Eruv, because even though he was violating Shabbat, he was embarrassed about it. He didn't want to do it brazen-faced. He didn't want to do it in public. He wanted to hide it. So even that is sufficient to be called biyachid and not befar Hesya. Good. Amar Huna, Ezehu Yisrael Mumar, Zeh Mechalel Shabbatot befar Hesya. Guys, can make a more general definition. What does it mean to be a Mumar? What does it mean to be an apostate? How can someone kind of exclude themselves? So this is Mechalel Shabbat in public, right? There's lots of laws, it's true, but other laws are not as don't define one's identity in the same way that Shabbat does. This makes a lot of sense. Shabbat is called the Berit in the Torah, and unlike not very few laws are defined that way. So Shabbat is essential for Jewish identity. Amar le Rav Nachman Keman. כרבי מאיר דאמר חשוד לדבר אחד חשוד לכל התורה כולה, אפילו באחד מכל איסורים שבתורה נמה. כרבנן האמר חשוד דבר אחד, להווה חשוד לכל התורה כולה. Now, Ravuna has a question. Rav Nachman has a question to Ravuna. Says, who are you following when whose opinion is this? Where there's another machloket, a more general machloket between Rabbi Meir and Rabbanan. Rabbi Meir says, someone who violates any one law, we have to worry that he's violating all of them. If he doesn't care about one law, then it means that he may not care about anything at all. And so therefore, even any law, so why if this is Bimeir, why are you particularly citing Mechalel Shabbat? Should be any law. Just say someone who violates any law is a mumad and they're out. So it can't be Bimeir, and it can't be Rabbanan because he says if it's only one He says, if you're only in violation of one law or suspected of one transgression, then we do not suspect. Maybe he's just he's lax or lazy or has a hard time with this one mitzvah, but we do not suspect him. So here too, if someone is mechalel Shabbat befaresya, okay, that's very bad. But why should we assume that that means that he's out of the picture altogether? According to the Banan, only one mitzvah, avodah zarah, idolatry. That explicitly saying, I believe in these other gods, and so thereby he is out of the community. But any other law by itself should not stand. So which one does this follow if he's mechalel Shabbat? Okay, so we're going to see two answers to this. The first one, the Madam Nachman Vayislach, Liten Reshut Ulbatel Reshut. This is, you're right. Someone who violates Shabbat only is still considered a Jew for all other things. Only, in other words, so he's following Rabbanan, and only regarding Eruv. If he's mechalel Shabbat, then he doesn't care about Shabbat. In that case, he cannot join an Eruv. He's not considered a Jew for the laws of Eruv. But for other matters, like if he touches wine or something, then he's okay. He's considered a Jew. So he's only a mumad for this particular thing, for Eruv. Uchedetanya Yisrael mumad meshamesh Shabbato bashuk mevatel reshut. Sheno meshamesh Shabbato bashuk and no mevatel reshut. We have a braita that backs this up. Someone, a Jew is an apostate, if he keeps the Shabbat when he's outside in public, then he can renounce his property. Right? He's still in the community because he shows some respect for Shabbat, even if he doesn't follow it in private. But if he even in public he disregards Shabbat, that shows that he doesn't care about Shabbat. And if so, then he can't be part of this in Eruv, and he cannot renounce his property to other Jews. Is considered like a non-Jew for the laws of Shabbat for carrying. This is more general, not really adding anything new that we didn't know before, because they said a Jew can renounce his property, or he can also take it. If everybody else renounces it, he can take that property, but only a Jew can do that. A non-Jew cannot use renunciation, but rather we have to rent from him the right to use his courtyard. Kesad, how do you do that? How do you renounce property? Omer lo, reshuti kinuyalecha, reshuti mubotelitecha, kana, ve'en sarich liskot. In order to renounce property, all you have to do is get up and make an announcement. My rights are yours. I renounce my rights. That works, and you don't have to go and actually make a formal transaction and do a trade or sudad or anything like that. Okay, good. So that's one way of answering the question of Rav Nachman, that he's a mumad only for the laws of Eruv, but not in general. Rav Ashi, however, has a different answer. Rav Ashi amar haytanahu dechamira ale Shabbat ka'avodah zarah. No, according to this, it's in fact following the first opinion here that says that someone who's mechalel, who even one law. I'm sorry, it's still Rabbanan, and violating Shabbat is the same as idolatry, right? Or any other laws, we don't suspect the person, if they violate just one law, that they are they're an apostate. But Shabbat is special and has the same status of avodah zarah. So where are we going to learn this? That someone who violates Shabbat, it's as if he's an idolater and is excluded from the Jewish nation. כדתניא מכם ולא כולכם פרת מומר מכם בכם חילקתי ולא באומות. In Vayikra was talking about the korban olah. It says Adam ki yakrib mikem. If one of you, in other words, someone from Bnei Israel, but it says mikem, from among you. In other words, not anyone from Bnei Israel can bring a korban as a hatat, only some. So who does it exclude? It excludes a mumar, someone who's an apostate. We didn't learn who an apostate is yet. It was going to come in a second. But mikem, it still has to be from you. In other words, only an apostate who is Jewish is excluded. and only among Bnei Israel do we separate between those who are apostates and those who are okay. However, for the nations, for non-Jews, there is no distinction. In other words, if someone who's not Jewish wants to bring a korban olah, they can, even though they are pagans, even though they are idolaters. They can bring a korban because they don't fit into the category of being a mumar, since they're not under the obligation of the mitzvot to begin with. Okay, so min habehema, that's still not relevant to our proof because we didn't define what it is. But we're going to see min habehema. You can bring an animal as a korban olah. Okay, Min HaBehema teaches not only that you can bring an animal, but even a person that acts like an animal, they can also bring a korban and thereby make teshuvah. Even someone who sins can bring a korban so that we will help them make teshuvah. Min hamumar v'menaseach yain v'mechalil Shabbat b'fares. However, the following looks like there's three people here: an apostate, someone who pours libations, meaning an idol worshiper, and someone who violates Shabbat. Okay, so you see here that violating Shabbat is grouped together with idolatry and an apostate, and these people cannot bring korban; they're excluded from the Jewish nation. Okay, now we have to clarify a few things about this sifra. Hagufa kashya. First of all, there's an internal difficulty. The first statement we said was from among you. Not everybody can bring korban. Not a mumar cannot bring a korban. And then you said in the second statement, mekabelin korban b'poshe Israel. A sinner from Israel can bring a korban. So which one is it? Oh, so it must be the first category, someone who violates all the laws. That's called the mumar. And the second category of a posheya, who acts like an animal, but he doesn't violate all the laws, only some of them. So that person still has an opening. He can still bring korban and make teshuvah. Okay, fine. So now we defined mumad as someone who violates all the laws, but now that contradicts the last part. So it says, except for, we had three categories here. Mumad, menasech, yamech Shabbat, which means that they cannot. Now, if the mumad is someone who violates all the Torah, we already said that in the beginning, in the first part, that says the mumad is excluded. So why are you saying it again? If you only violated one thing, well, then that's the same as the middle of the sifra. And over there, you said he can bring a korban. So what kind of mumad is this? Rather, this we have to understand the last part. Mumad is not a separate category, but rather is the general category, and there's two particular sins that make someone a mumad, and that is idolatry and violating Shabbat. So you can become a mumad by violating all the laws, or by the particular laws of idolatry and Shabbat. Those are the most important identifying laws about your voting. Am I in the nation or out of the nation? Alma avodah zarah v'Shabbat ki adadeh ninhu shema mina. And so now we've concluded, and this is all Rav Asher's answer, that it's Shabbat and idolatry. Those are what define someone as in or out for all purposes, not only for Eruv, but for everything else as well. And this is a very important source because we see today also that when we want to see if someone is basically observant, we're going to ask, are they shomer Shabbat or mechalel Shabbat? That is defining in a way that other mitzvot are not. Okay, next Mishnah, Anshe Haser Sheshachach Ehad Mehen Velo Arev Beto Asur Melechnis Melosi Lo Velahem. Okay, a lot of things in the Mishnah we've already been introduced to. And some parts of the Mishnah have already been quoted and discussed. So people are in a courtyard, and one of them forgot and didn't make an eruv. Everybody else made an eruv, but he didn't make an eruv. So he So nobody can go into his house. He cannot carry into his house, and he can't carry out of it. Okay. But even that person who did not join the Eruv, he can walk outside of his house, not carrying anything, and then he would be allowed to carry from the courtyard into other people's homes and back, because they made an eruv, and so he's a guest, right? Just like if I walked to your courtyard from somewhere else, and now I'm your guest, I can carry within your courtyard because you made an eruv. So that would be the same thing here. Natnu lo reshutan hu mutar vehen asurin. If they all renounced their rights to the courtyard and gave it to him, to that one person, then he would be allowed to carry from his house to the courtyard and back, but they would not be able to. Okay, good. Hayush shenaim. Let's say there are two people who did not join the eruv. Then that's a problem. Osrin ze al ze. They prohibit each other, because even if there was only two people in the courtyard that didn't make an eruv, they wouldn't be able to carry from their homes to the courtyard or to each other. So that's a problem. Shechan noten reshut v'notel reshut shenaim notnin reshut ve'en notnin reshut. Because if you have only one person who forgot to join the eruv, then he can renounce his rights, or they can renounce their rights to him. But if it's two people, then it won't work, because even if everybody renounces their rights to those two people still prohibit each other from carrying. So when you have two people forgot, then you're stuck. Now, when do you have to do this bitul if you want to renounce the property? You have to do it before Shabbat starts, right? Everything has to be all in order before Shabbat starts. Betil says you can even do it on Shabbat itself. And this is one we quoted a number of times. That is, someone who did renounce his property, but then he goes and carries. He was not allowed to do that. But by doing that, he undoes his renunciation, according to the Meir, whether he does it on purpose or by mistake. Yehuda says only if it's on purpose. That shows he's undoing it. If it's by mistake, he just made a mistake, but he doesn't mean to undo his renunciation. Good, that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara is going to comment on each section. Beto hudasur ha hasero sharia. So if one person does not join the eruv, then people cannot go and carry into his house, but his courtyard is permitted. So what was the case? If he renounced his property, then his home should also be okay. That people should be able to walk into his home because he renounced the rights to his home, and so now the people can come in and use his home and carry there also. If he didn't do any renunciation, then his courtyard should not be allowed. Must be a case where he said, I renounced my rights to the courtyard, and so everybody can go use my courtyard, but not to my home. And this follows Rabbanan. This was a machloket we saw in previous stuff with Rabbi Eliezer, that according to Rabbanan, someone who renounces his rights to the courtyard means to only renounce the courtyard, because he doesn't want to give up his house, and so he doesn't mind living just in the house and without the courtyard, even though it's a bit uncomfortable. He's not going to be able to take his things outside. That's okay, but he's going to retain the rights to the house even when he renounces the courtyard. Okay, so that explains that clause. That when that single person renounces his rights to everybody else, he is allowed to go. He can't carry out of his own house, but he can go and carry within the courtyard and into other people's houses. Why? Because he's like a guest there. Okay, good. Natnu lo reshutan hu mutar vehen asurin. If all the others in the courtyard renounce all of their property to one person, however, then he is allowed to carry from his house to the courtyard, but the rest of them are not. And here's a question: let all those others be the same, be as guests. Just like when one person renounces his rights to everybody else, he can go there and carry in the courtyard and carry in their houses. Why not say the same thing when the 5 people, or however many there are, renounce all to one person, that they can be like guests for his house? We say, you might have thought that, but no, it doesn't work. A guest means usually it's the minority are guests. You can't have the majority of the people that are guests. So one person can be a guest and hosted by 5 people, but 5 people are not going to be guests hosted by just one person. That's not the way it works. Shema mina mebatilin. Okay, so that's the answer. Now it looks like from this Mishnah, Shema mina mebatilin v'chozrin mebatilin. This looks like what we saw in the previous machloket, that if we can do re-renouncing. If I renounce my property to you, and then you can go and carry and use it, and then afterwards you can renounce the property back, and then I can go and use it. Where do we see that? Well, because we're reading it kind of like a story. That if they forgot, so they renounce it, and then they can do it. Natnu lo deshutan, and then so one person renounced to them, and then if we read it, the next clause and going in chronological order, and after that, one person renounced to them, they all renounce their property to him. So you see that if this is all one case and one happened on one Shabbat, then this shows you can keep doing it. We're going to answer and say, no, it's talking about just 2 different cases. These are not in chronological order in telling a story. Right, that case is a new case. If he had at first, at the outset, before anyone did any other renunciation, they all renounced to him, then it's allowed. But once he renounces, they can't go back and renounce their property back to him. Okay, good. Hayu shenayim, if there's 2 people that did not join the eruv, then osrin ze al ze, they prohibit each other. Pishita, obviously, they do. I mean, that's the basic case. Laser ichad hadar chad minayhu ubatel lechabre maudatem alishtere k'mash malan dechavan debaidana debatel lahavele shadyuta b'hai chaser. Oh, so this is as follows. Let's say you have 10 people in the courtyard, and 2 they made the eruv, but 2 people forgot. So you might have thought as follows: the 8 people can renounce their property, right, to those 2, and then after that, one of those 2 will renounce all of his property to only one. And that way, you have one person who has the rights to all of the courtyard, and that person can go and carry from his house to the courtyard, and that would all be joined together. So you might have thought that you can do that 2-stage renunciation, and so therefore this Mishnah is going to teach us that you cannot do that, because those 2 people did not have rights to the courtyard themselves. They can't carry on them. They themselves cannot carry. Therefore, they do not have a right to then renounce the property that they just got yet again to someone else. That can't work. Okay, and last clause for today: she'achad noten reshut. Right, one person can give away his. Hatu lamali. What do I have to say that again at the end of the Mishnah? We already said that. Inoten tanena, inotel tanena. If you're saying that one person can renounce his property, we already know that one person can take the property renounced by others. We also know that. So what do we need this for? So this teaches that 2 people can renounce their property. Wait, Hanami Peshita, we also know that. We said many people can renounce their property. Oh, I might have thought perhaps that would make a gezerah. We should not allow 2 people to renounce their property, because then you might think that they can also take the property that the other 8 renounce. And so we should make a gezerah and not allow them to renounce either. And therefore this teaches us that no, we don't make such a gezerah, and two people can renounce their property for the other 8, even though the two people cannot receive the renunciation if the other 8 gave it to them. Baruch Adonai Olam, Amen, Amen.